listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians. So today I am so delighted to be able to welcome Lisa Ashton onto the podcast. She probably needs no introduction, but I am just going to give you the headlines of what she does. So Lisa is lots of things. So she's the UK authority in the application of Equitation Science, and she's been communicating for over 2 decades about this science-based research of how horses learn. And she's very much globally recognised by her intersectional approach to leading positive change inside equestrian organisations. And the list is almost endless, but just to give you a flavour, we're talking about work with the Blue Cross and Redwings and the Horse Trust and Greater Manchester Police, various universities and colleges, veterinary practices, the Veterinary Nursing Association, and the fabulous international dressage stud Mount St. John. She's also a equitation science lecturer at Hartpury University and has won various awards for that as well. I'm going to put a full description of Lisa down in the comment box because there is so much. So Lisa, big warm welcome. It's lovely to have you on the podcast.
Oh, Tracy, that's so lovely. Thank you for having me. This has been a lovely sort of organic way after we met a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, thank you for inviting me on, and yeah, hi to all your listeners.
So let's start really basic. I know you've got masses that you could say, but not perhaps in one podcast. What, in a nutshell, is equitation science for anyone that's not explored it?
Beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah, let me do what it's not. What it's not is a method. It's not a method of training your horse, which I think some people may have got confused over years, but it is really all about the evidence-based information when we show up for our horse-human interactions. So it started off originally with the science of how horses learn. So when I talk about how they learn and their cognition, we're looking at what they're picking up as a learnt response to your interactions and to your listeners' interactions. And it's actually expanded out of cognition, and it's gone into biomechanics. It's gone into psychology. I'm talking about human psychology. If you go to an equitation science conference, there'll be all sorts of impacts of humans. Perhaps it's even things like the bras we would choose to ride in because of the impact on our horse's well-being. And so really, when I think about the question you asked, what is equitation science? I think one answer is evidence-based information, but it's horse-centric. It's starting with what is in it for the horse. And so actually having interactions in our training, because every interaction is a learning opportunity for your horse, that you start to see that there is knowledge available that will really help, I guess, average trainers become good trainers become outstanding because of the knowledge of how horses learn under that umbrella of equitation science. There's one thing I didn't mention in my answer, which I would like to, is something called the 10 first principles. Now, this was put together by the International Society for Equitation Science. And the reason why I'm mentioning them is because if we were sort of in manufacturing or advertising, any sector, there are always first principles. And I think sometimes people either miss that point, but these are 10 first principles of training. So when I said to you what equitation science is not, it isn't a method. It's about these 10 principles. And like, for example, the first one is a regard for horse and rider safety. So anything that puts our horses feeling unsafe and our riders, where it can actually cause a minor or major incident, is actually worth our regard and therefore our ability to want to research it. Let's say our curiosity.
Fantastic. So I mean, it's got science in the name because it is evidence-based. It is a science, and I love a bit of science, but I know some people are switched off by science. So, who is equitation science aimed at? Is it for everyone, or is it more in the academic realm?
Another lovely question. Look at you, Tracy. Um, so yeah, I love the question because because I intersect both academia and horse lovers. And I think you will, we didn't get on to sort of what I did 7 years ago, but 7 years ago, I decided to create a psychologically safe space online called Coffee with Horse Lovers. And you can tell by the name of my community that actually, which you're a member of, Tracy, you know, hopefully lots of your listeners are also members, but that was my let's include all. My reach out for having all horse lovers in a community where we can share and discuss evidence-based information. And I think that word science, as you said, has really got a bad rap. But I think that's no different to, you know, words like, I recognize the word welfare used to, not now, be a word that people who felt, wanted to repel themselves against. They were like, no, Lisa, you can't talk about welfare. You can talk about well-being. And I feel like science has gone down that road where we used to be able to talk about science. And what I mean by that, to be clear, which is another one of the 10 principles, is about clarity of communication for your horse. But what I want to be really clear about is actually science is just a process. It's the scientific process for the aim of achieving as close to the truth as we can actually get. So for different species, such as a horse, that is really challenging because we're not a horse. And I think that's part of perhaps why science or equitation science or equine science doesn't have the most attractive associations or emotions, shall we say, based on the fact that actually we're never going to be a horse and we are just working hard, probably making mistakes, trying to get closer to that. But it's the process that interests me personally. I'm interested in the rigor and the robustness of getting closer to the truth about how horses learn. So that's really sort of why I got on this journey. And it sort of takes me back because I was a full-time lecturer many years ago. I was teaching on a module called, I think it was something like horse behavior and training. And I was tasked as part of that curriculum to communicate to my students all about different methods. So like Monty Roberts, which is known as Equus, or Pirelli, there was Tellington Touch. And so they're being recognized by horse lovers, which is why I set up Coffee with Horse Lovers, as potential avenues to learn. And here I am at an academic institution training students as undergraduate students in what this actually means for behavior and training. So I was a bit like, well, what actually does this mean from the horse's perspective? What's actually going on in a round pen for the horse? What's actually happening to the horse when they're doing, say, something called the circling game or the porcupine game? These are sort of language wrapped up in these methods. And that particular method, that language links to Pirelli. And then I had Linda Turnton Touch's work all about, which I was critiquing for the students, all about a wand. You know, like when we start to think about language and methods, I was really using my critical thinking and thinking, so for the lived experience of that horse, and I didn't have language myself at that time, we're looking at 20 years ago now, but I was looking at the horse's responses, their responsivity to, say, the trainer believing they're communicating Equus, or the trainer who believes they're playing a game. And it happens to be called the porcupine game or the circling game or if you know the Pirelli system, there are 7 games. So, and with that system, the stick is called a carrot stick.
Yeah.
So you can really see that with my lens of critical thinking, I was looking for, at that time, something to explain what is going on from the horse's perspective. And at that point, I got gifted from my sister a book called The Truth About Horses for Christmas. And she read off the back of The Truth About Horses to me. At the time, there used to be things like book clubs. Do you remember? Equestrian?
Yeah, gosh, yeah, I am old enough for those.
I hope the listeners have also managed to relate to that. But if you haven't related to what we just shared, the back of, a book club, an equestrian book club, was you paid a monthly membership, and then every month they sent you a book, but you had to choose a book. And so my sister was in the monthly book club and she had to choose a book. Well, she didn't have to. She decided that my Christmas present, I was getting a book. That's right.
She couldn't think of a book that she actually wanted, but she thought, oh, I'll give Lisa that one.
So she did it was probably the most defining moment of my life, in the sense that it's put me on my own career and my purpose. But the book was called The Truth About Horses. You can still get it, actually, by Dr. Andrew McLean. It is a text that really speaks to horse lovers as opposed to academics. And the back of it actually said, and I remember what it said, I've still got the book anyway, but it said, the book that actually helps you to understand the why, the how, and the what of horse training. And I just knew that because of that module I was teaching on, that was the book I needed. So that's what I said to my sister, I would love The Truth About Horses. She gave it to me on Christmas Day on 2003. And so I came up for lunch or Christmas Day dinner. But other than that, I consumed that book all day on the 25th of December, 2003. And so, it was really it's a defining moment, because I thought people don't want to know the story that puts you on the course that you go on, or that. And so I will always be of so much gratitude for my sister and the book clubs. And of course, most gratitude to the horses that shaped Dr. Andrew McLean. So he is my mentor. He is the author of that book, but author of so many other books. He does clinics and he's an expert witness. But Dr. Andrew McLean, we're very good friends, and he certainly has upgraded my thinking in terms of objectivity, curiosity, and just being able to explore the needs of the horse in sport as well. We didn't really mention my equestrian background, but I'm a A-test holder. I went all the way through Pony Club. That's the Pony Club A-test. I'm a BHS II. This was all before this defining moment. I call it sort of the catalyst, and for the rest of my career. And so, with that practical background and understanding, I always felt then at that point as a lecturer, I was already intersecting practice and academia. And so to meet someone like Dr. Andrew McLean, who has ridden for Australia, he's represented his country, he's a 3-day evented, he's trained racehorses, he totally, and his doctorate was on the cognition and mental abilities of horses. So you can really start to see that perhaps what the question is, what is equitation science, and why does it even matter to the horse lover? I think it's this ability to want to get closer to the truth about what your horse is actually experiencing, as opposed to a trainer telling you their method. And maybe they use language like games and carrot sticks and joining up with you and all these things that sound amazing, whilst actually what the horse might be experience, and if we don't have any regard for it, we won't even identify perhaps that they are not feeling safe. And so the only safe space in a round pen to be, because remember, part of that method may be to move their legs. Part of that method might be then the only safe space is to be with you, because that's where you stop moving their legs. Now, that is also known as removal or negative reinforcement. So you can start to see now, once you have a lens of what's actually going on, the scientific process of modes of learning, you can bring critical thinking to all methods, which circles me back to the start of your question, which was, what is equitation science? It's not a method. What equitation science brings to all of us, especially probably the horse lover, is the ability to actually choose to be curious about what's in it for the horse. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably where my passion is and why I work in academia. And, you know, I'm, as you know, you mentioned I'm the Mount St. John behavior consultant. So I intersect both sort of out of academia and in academia, and how really just helping more people, more horse lovers, to get closer to the truth about their interactions, as opposed to the narrative that may be either being told or sold, or perhaps sometimes it's just so hard to look into our rear view mirror. And I know, Tracy, you do a lot of work with this, with our own biases, but it's very hard to see that we are how we're showing up with our own language and our own way we're processing what's happening in front of us. We then project onto the horse something that may or may not be real.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. I suppose as well, when you think about the other methods that you've been talking about, and other similar methods compared to the equitation science, when I think about the ones that you mentioned, you know, the Monty Roberts and the Pirelli and things like that, I suppose there's a way of doing it that the practitioners who are masterful at it are doing it correctly. But then if you've just watched a video of somebody doing it, rather than thought about, well, how's the horse actually feeling? And then you go and try and replicate it with your horse who isn't used to these methods and doesn't understand the game or really what you want. So I suppose that, you know, it's given us, the equitation science, a way, exactly what you said, of critically saying, well, this aspect is really good. And this aspect, or I could do this kind of game, but I need to do it a little bit differently, or in a different setting, out of a round pen, or whatever it might be. So we can adapt some of these things as well. Would you say that would be fair?
Yeah, what you're talking about, I think, is cognitive flexibility. And I think as coaches, and certainly I am an equestrian coach, being able to have enough knowledge of how horses learn that I can actually respond, that word responsiveness again, to the individual horse that's in front of me. Because I think what you're recognizing is there are methods that might have more of do this if your horse is maybe, you know, there's certain programs that I can think of that says if your horse is, say, an introvert, do da 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 da. And if you're,
Yeah.
I don't want to talk like that. To me, I'm interested in the responsiveness of the horse in front of me based on my communication or clarity of it, based on what we call as aids or stimuluses, my cues and their responses. And you know, this is in the world of behavioral science and animal behavioral science. So this is nothing new. We're sort of certainly at least 20 years behind dog trainers. This field of knowledge is at least 60 years old, whereas horse training, we've been domesticating horses and riding them for over 5,000 years. So you can see that we're just playing catch up now. So I'm really sort of like, I feel really sort of warm that we get to do this because of the I stand on the shoulders of really amazing equitation science giants. And it's basically a lot of people's research that gets to this point where we can actually help that individual horse in front of us. And I say that because you mentioned earlier that I've done a lot of work with different charities. And the reason why I've worked with the charities such as Blue Cross, Redwings, is they have horses presenting because they've been either abandoned, abused, neglected. And so with that word sort of understanding that they've got layering of trauma, actually, if you are unable to have the breadth of knowledge to help all the individuals with, you know, some might have been neglected, but some might have been abused. Like you have different for me, it's about knowing the modes of learning and then being able to recognize what that individual horse needs in order to, and we talk about something called cognitive bias. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, you know, like I'll be working with horses that perhaps because of their previous learning history will actually be more pessimistic. And so what have I got in my horse training toolkit or in my understanding of how horses learn that will help a horse be able to expand from being pessimistic? And we've got nice studies on this, cognitive bias, in particular judgment bias, and then to help them become and expand towards being more optimistic, which is in the world of mindset and growth mindset. And so you can start to see that actually knowing how horses learn and then looking at your horse as a horse lover and thinking, actually, what more can I do to expand their resilience? And that's the work I do with Mount St. John. You know, the foals are born. I train the team. We look at the uptake, or we apply learning theory to expand these foals' ability to receive whatever's coming. Perhaps it's going to be a gold medal at the Olympics, but whatever's coming for their future, that they have the resilience to be able to navigate with that level of curiosity in the horse so that they can actually thrive rather than just survive.
So we talked a lot about horses so far. Does equitation science, I know obviously you think about the horse-human relationship, but does it also do something for the human?
I mean, how can we not be shaped and changed with our interaction with horses? I think that's really exciting. Certainly I've got colleagues that especially put the spotlight on us, especially attitudes, beliefs and biases. My colleague, Dr. Inga Wolfman, she is a sports psychologist and she's done lots of contributions, but I think it's something we could do more of as a field. I don't think it's not as equal, perhaps, in terms of social science as it is with the science of, say, the biomechanics of horses, the learning and cognition. Whereas the social science for me is more about actually being able to understand how we change our minds. Yeah. Like that really and I've been exploring this. I'm with the masters at Hartpury called Equitation Science Masters is a really interesting masters. It's beautifully done. It's exquisitely intersecting what we call one welfare. So been looking at the horse-human interactions. And then the module that I run at level 7 is called Applied Equine Cognition and Learning. And inside that, I get to explore with my students how they communicate science. And I think this gets really interesting because now they're learning about how information lands on people. And how actually when we talk at others, we're contributing by losing their agency because we're the ones that taken away the other person's agency because we're talking at them. And then the other person is going, I can't be curious because you've shut down my agency, my freedom to choose to be curious. So it's been a beautiful module where I get to sort of really help students to recognize that none of this matters, none of this knowledge matters, however you know what you know, this word epistemology, which is knowledge, if how we land on others creates either more of our own beliefs and double down on perhaps this is how we've always done it. This is the status quo. And, I can see you recognize that as equine. It's not just unique to equine, I don't think. I mean, I know it isn't, but the fact that as humans, we do love a bit of safety in the status quo, as opposed to perhaps looking and saying, do you know what? How can I update or improve my horse's lived experience? And that's where my students are at this point where they've got the knowledge of how to improve the lived experience based on all this other research coming in of positive change. But it's not happened yet. So it can't be that basic. If it was, this is my point, really. This is my point. So a little case study for us. It's low hanging fruit in terms of what we can do. But when we are truly showing up in what I call having welfare horse sports, and what I mean by that is instead of horse sports with welfare, we're demonstrating that our horses are enriched because of our interactions. When we're really showing up like that, what we'll see are the low-hanging fruit stuff happen. And what that means is instead of patting our horses, which we've always done, it seems like, partly because as humans we pat each other, like we pat Johnny on the...
Yeah.
At best, if you're still busy patting your horse, brilliant. As in, at best, one rein is being released. So you are providing some release of pressure, which, if it's got no attachment to a learnt response, is probably just a little bit redundant. But there is a release. But the key about the scratches is it's not what we find of value, like patting each other. It's actually what they do with each other. You know, we know this, they allogroom. We've actually got research where the scientists have found that it lowers the heart rate by 10 beats per minute.
Oh, wow. That's massive. Wow.
Yeah, it's a relaxation hack, Tracy.
Yeah. Well, I do actually scratch my horses sometimes just because, not because I'm saying good girl or anything like that, just in the stable. And they love it. Horses love it, don't they? They really do.
And, you know, like even our foals when they're born, oh my God, that ability to meet their needs of being scratched. It's actually about touch. They're a social species. And so the fact that we can show up and add value by giving them, the research shows that we need to be scratching at the beginning for 2 minutes. So you need to get that in. It's quite a while, you know.
Yeah.
But because of something called associative learning or classical conditioning, we can actually then shrink that to actually not very long, but you have to make a value in the beginning. So that 2-minute scratches, and then I always pair it with a word. So you can say good, or I do something like and that is basically telling the horse that something is coming that they find of value. And I work with that individual horse. So often it is a scratch because they're social species, but that tells them that actually now that value of scratching is arriving. And then they get to experience that, what we call that reinforcement. So they do more of the behavior that they just did that I marked not because of the cluck, not because of that, because of the scratch. And I think this is the bit where actually equitation science doesn't belong anywhere. It belongs to every single horse owner. You know, like it's actually about, can you get closer to your horse's lived experience, and can you improve it? That's the positive change that's the movement I'm interested in. So this scratching, it is of value to your horse. They do it to each other. It lowers their heart rate by 10 beats per minute. And it's right under our noses. Yeah. Like, you know, we're under saddle, we're riding, we've just finished our dressage test, we're at the Olympic Games, and we've just done a halt. And the first thing that you would want to do, I'm sure, is to give your horse something of value to them. Mm-hmm. And so we would start to scratch the base of the wither, or if you really know your individual horse, I actually saw Becky Moody do this. So she was a participant in the 2024 Olympic Games. She went up the neck and started scratching either side of his neck, Jägerbom's neck. So she really was an outlier, a bit like Charlotte Desjardins all those years ago with the helmet. She was an outlier at the 2012 Olympic Games. And I saw Becky Moody scratching at the either side of Jägerbom's neck. And I was just like, she is the future, because what she's actually providing is she's achieving low-hanging fruit. It isn't a high bar, if I'm honest. You know, if you said to raise the bar a bit, I can. So, yeah, I'm really excited that when we really start to think about this whole importance of positive welfare, and we can start to look at positive change, what I'm interested in is it's not what we think it is, games and join up, and it's actually what's happening for the individual horse. And if we can add value and demonstrate enrichment, that's the bit that the public want to know, that we need to be trusted, that we can safeguard horses or be their guardians. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit, perhaps. Maybe your listeners will all sort of go away now and get, you know, explore. I call this, with my students, I just talk about finding their sweet spot. So, you know, maybe your listeners could write in or comment and say, you know, they've actually gone and found their sweet spot, or they know their sweet spot. It's such and such a place. If it's right under our noses, we can do it under saddle. And then you start to build this work, that relationship we're looking for, where actually, instead of it being what we get from the horse, we start to actually privilege what they are valuing, as opposed to what we've decided we want as our therapies. A lot of our storytelling around horses is what we get from horses. I'm not quite sure whether we could really be that truly honest with ourselves and to look at whether we meet their needs as much as perhaps they meet ours or exceed our needs.
Yeah. And we want to do, don't we? We really want to do the best for our horses.
Oh, but yeah.
But we've all learnt something that maybe 10 years ago we were doing, 20 years ago we were doing, that we don't do anymore because we've relearned that isn't effective, or, that isn't great. That isn't great for welfare or whatever.
I love that, Tracy.
But we're all quite open. It's just knowing where to get this knowledge, and that scratching thing's fantastic. Are there any other pieces of low-hanging fruit that we could do?
Yeah, okay.
I know
I've got lots.
You could talk all day and all night on this stuff, and so we said before we started, didn't we? This is just the tip of the iceberg. It's not even the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg, and it's just to get people interested, isn't it? So that they do a bit more exploration and they find out, they investigate what they can do. But go on, give us another tip. Go on.
Oh, okay. I mean, I could go two ways with this. I might have to give you both, all right? Because
okay.
One of the ones that I love that science brings that helps all of us is being able to look at things like eye blink rate. So this is a very tangible thing that actually, if you think about when your horse, some people say to me, how do I know about the fourth principle, which is about a regard for the emotional state of the horse? Well, there's some really nice indicators for all of us. And one of them is looking at the eye. And then they're like, well, what do you mean? And I could be a bit more complex, but I'm not going to do it. We're on a podcast. I can do that in one of my lectures. But today, what I'll mention is if you think about a rabbit in headlights, when a horse is actually escalating from being aroused, which is a great place to be in terms of optimal, this, with performance and the Yerkes-Dodson law, that we need to have some arousal. But as we escalate up into anxiety, one of the things that actually happens for horses, and you can relate to this, is that the eyes will not blink. So it's a bit like a rabbit in headlights. And if you're thinking that your horse is actually coping, or because he's not ran away, or he's not distressed, in your opinion, actually start looking for indicators for evidence. So I call this, I'm going to invite all your listeners to become detectives. I would like them to start to pick up the clues a bit like in Scooby-Doo and the mystery machine. Are we just too old for that? I mean, I don't know around.
No, not at all, not at all.
So let's be detectives and start to actually look. And what we're looking for is full blinks to help understand that there is some relaxation going on. So that's one little nice thing, that you're looking at the eye blink rate and you can actually start to count the blinks. One of the things that I rethink now, and I'll give you an example of why I think equitation science, this is another example of why I'm so passionate about equitation science, is having cognitive flexibility. One of the things that I used to think, based on being in this world, is that when a horse was licking and chewing, that perhaps learning was taking place. But actually, research has happened, because now we know better. I'm inviting us all to do better. If you still think that, it's not actually the truth about what's going on. And so I went back to my clients and I was teaching them, and I said, oh, yes, I used to think that. And especially if they would point it out to me that, look, my horse is now licking and chewing. I'm like, a bit like you and I, when we're feeling anxious, and so we're a bit aroused, but now we're starting to escalate towards anxiety. What will happen is we get physiological changes, and we'll get a dry throat and you might recognize that and think, oh, just before your dressage test, you'll have a swig of water
Yeah.
So what we actually now know is that if your horse is licking and chewing, or licking and a little bit like that, actually, whatever you did just before they licked and did all those mouth movements will have actually been some sort of form of arousal into anxiety. And so reading that now with more of a lens of getting closer to their lived experience, you're getting indicators that whatever you just did is up there for them. And so our job is to actually bring them back down. We've mentioned the scratches. We can actually change physiologically their heart rate by 10 beats per minute. So you can start to see that our job now as a horse-human interaction, yes, they're going to be learning, but we can actually start to do number 4 of the first principles, we can start to manage their emotional state or help change their lived experience through their emotions because of understanding that the indicators that they're showing behaviorally. So I guess that that's some low hanging fruit. And I couldn't not finish without talking about the release of rain or any pressure. So pressure should be the least amount. So that word light, I talk about a fly. If a fly wasn't aversive, horses wouldn't be motivated to flick a fly off with either a skin flick or a tail swish. So even a fly is the least amount of pressure, but is still aversive. If it wasn't, they would just hang out with loads of flies on them.
Yeah.
And so the key here is that we show up under saddle and in hand where we use the least amount of pressure to motivate a response. And as soon as that response has happened, so I talk about 4 things: accelerate, decelerate, abduct a foreleg, adduct a foreleg, same for hind legs. So we got opening and closing of forelegs, opening and closing of hind legs, and quicker and slower. As soon as you get those responses to your signals, the point for the horse is the off.
Yeah.
And it's the release of pressure. And I think that isn't such a low hanging fruit, unfortunately. This needs to happen in curriculum, coaches' curriculum, education, knowledge systems, that it's not about the pressure. It's all about what the horse gets reinforced for. So, when we think about why does a horse do the behavior, if they're busy rearing or you've got a horse that does a behavior you don't want, think about when you release the pressure and have you now just trained that behavior. So the whole point here is that pressure motivates, but it's the release that trains. And that is much more complex for people. The only thing I'd like to probably finish with, I guess, is recognizing that by using the word removal as opposed to the word negative could actually help more of us apply the mode of learning that we're actually in. So, for example, until we haven't worked out how to levitate.
Speak for yourself.
Basically, if you're riding horses, you are in the world of pressure, like you're sat on a horse. And so why would we not want to do what we call the word negative reinforcement? And what I mean by that, it's mathematical. It's the removal of pressure. It isn't about a bad thing. It's about something as aversive as pressure, such as a fly. There's the least amount of pressure with a fly. Actually, it's about that becoming removed, i.e. your rein pressure is removed. Your leg pressure is removed. What it's not is about constant pressure, relentless pressure, clashing pressures or clashing aids. And so that's when we start to get horses in conflict and confusion. And now they trial spinning, bucking, rearing, bolting. And now we're in this place where we think all of a sudden, or maybe now we've decided to label our horse naughty. And so that's where I do my work. That's why I sort of ripple from organizations such as the charities, but into Mount St. John, a stud, where we're all interested in improving that horse's lived experience because we're using evidence-based information.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So incredibly valuable. Thank you so much. Where do you think this is going to take us in the next 20 years? Because you've been in this just over 20 years. So where do you think the next 20 is going to go in an ideal world, in an ideal sense?
I think it's happening already. We're in exponential. In fact, I've actually heard we're officially in super exponential change. And it's basically because of technology, biological textiles. So this whole landscape we're trying to navigate, having relationships with our horses. One of the things that we're about 2 years short of is bringing something called facial action coding. So we have that in things like pigeons and dogs and horses. So it's called EquiFax, facial action coding. And so we've already had the dogs having this facial action coding being trained for deep learning in AI. So that's already going on. I reckon it won't be long, and we'll be using EquiFax through machine learning for being able to read what's going on for our horses. Now, as soon as that arrives, and I think about 2 years off that, So it's not even 20 years.
Yeah.
We will start to get the evidence of perhaps what at the moment we're struggling to see. And that is what's going on for the horse in, say, sport. So that's coming anyway. It's a bit like we've already got AI and things like airports and phones. And so I definitely know that that's going to probably upgrade us all. And so give us all an update. And once we've recognizing that that's going to be in place, I do think we can genuinely show up and demonstrate that we can and do enrich our horses. I guess if we don't do that, the other side of the crossroads is that, let's just rewind back to the 1960s. We had both circuses and zoos.
Wow. Yeah.
The circuses chose not to be proactive and respond to the concerns by public about using animals in entertainment, whilst the zoos chose to be proactive and they chose to respond to the public concerns about using animals for entertainment. Both were the same agendas. Yeah. What actually happened is the zoos did three things. They worked on conservation of the species. So they started swapping males and females. So if I had a male capuchin and you had a female capuchin, we would release, we would share our species. And that was for conservation. The second thing they did is they provided education for the public. So they became more educational centres. But the third thing that really changed for zoos was they became experts in the species that they were keeping captive, enrichment. And without those three things together, there would not have been the sustainability of zoos in 20, we're 40 odd years on. So I do think, I don't know the answer to your question because it's 20 years. I do know that collectively we are all responsible for how it ends. So, we are all collectively going to be taking up responsibility for providing our horses with safety. So I talk about three things, actually, that it's from the 5 domains model from Professor David Mellor et al. In 2020. So definitely to your listeners, go and have a look at that. It's actually an open access paper and it has had over 90,000 downloads since 2020. So it's one of those that really is shaping change. And what that's really about, the 5 domains, is we've got, the first one is about nutrition and hydration. Then it's all about physical environment. Then it's all about health. So those sort of sit on the side of physical well-being. And then on the other side is the 4th domain is behavior, but it's actually interactions. So it's interactions. The first one is A, is interactions with the environment. B is interactions with other animals. C is interactions with humans. So now we've got horse-human interactions in the 5 domains model. And the 5th domain is the domain where we actually assess from the other 4 their mental state. And that is their lived experience. Now that is when you said, where are we going in the next 20 years? If we're not able to demonstrate actually either a neutral or positive mental state in our interactions in sport at this point, I think I would like to sort of make it clear because it has rules and regulations and we boom ourselves into homes via the TV, via the Olympic Games, that actually if we can't demonstrate that, I don't see sustainability.
Yeah.
We'll end up like the circuses rather than using animals rather than the zoos. So I guess it's going to be down to our own collective actions for positive change.
Wow. Yeah. I like that analogy with the circuses and zoos. That's really brought it home to me that one flourished because they changed and the other one stayed the same and nobody goes to the circus anymore, or very, very few people go and see animals anyway.
Yeah, they can't actually. They've been legislated not to use the animals in the circus. You can go to a circus, but you won't see animals being used. So this is the same thing about using horses in sport. And so when I say instead of having horse sports with welfare, which I think seems to be post 2024 Olympics seems to be quite a strong narrative, I'm actually saying, no, let's actually do welfare horse horse sports. And although things like the scratches are really low hanging fruit, I mean, come on, that's low.
Yeah.
But it's a start, like actually beyond that, let's then start looking at how we train horses. And I use the word ethics. What I mean by ethical is just because we can doesn't mean we should. And that will then help us earn public trust. And that's how we earn public acceptance, which I've written an ebook all about social license.
Wow. Okay. Well, when I put some stuff in the description box, it's going to be an essay in itself, all the things you mentioned, so people can go and look it up. Thank you so much, Lisa. Where can we find you online?
Yeah, I'm online. You can find me at equicoach.life. So that's my website, but please come into Coffee with Horse Lovers. It is a Facebook community. Come and join. I'm also on Instagram, and again, all linked back to Coffee with Horse Lovers. But yeah, it'd be really lovely because I passionately believe the only way we get to keep enjoying our relationships with horses in sport. And you've heard from my beginning that I've actually been involved a lot with horses in sport, and I've come in from various different angles, but we can't sustain what we're doing unless we actually embrace change. And I think your members are really, or your listeners, they know how uncomfortable change is. And actually, if you're not in discomfort, your change isn't taking place anyway. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, of course you do. We need to embrace this discomfort. And, when I say discomfort, perhaps it's because now we have to be the learner and not the knower. That is about being the learner of the horse. And we haven't got anywhere near close to actually knowing what's going on for horses, but we're trying, this is the bit about trying to get into equifax and the deep learning that will happen through artificial intelligence. We are not stopping trying to get closer to the truth about horses. Will we ever? No, of course not. We're not a horse. But this is the bit where the public need to know we are trusted to do no harm. So I definitely would like to invite you all to pop into Coffee with Horse Lovers, because inside that community, my community, there is such a wealth of diversity of knowledge and research. And it blows me away, the cognitive breadth of diversity. And so I think that's the thing I would say to your listeners is, if you want to be challenged and embrace discomfort, absolutely hop out of your own communities and definitely put one foot or both feet fully into finding out a bit more with Coffee with Horse Lovers.
Yeah, it's a lovely group. It's a lovely group, and everybody's welcome to ask a question. There's nobody that would say that the question is too small or too silly or anything like that. Is it? If you were a beginner, you're just finding out about this stuff, there's so many very, very supportive voices in there. Thank you so much, Lisa. That has been tremendous. I have enjoyed talking to you so much. I think I could have talked to you all afternoon, but I know you're a very busy lady. So I will let you go, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, let's catch up soon.